they said, therefore, he wasn't credible because if he had assaulted a police officer, he could get in trouble in his job.
What?
Mind-blowing, because most of my clients are people who, aren't, maybe they don't have a job. Maybe they're leading a life of crime, and they're not credible because they don't have a job and because they're criminals. And yet, if you're a law enforcement officer, then you're not credible. So that sort of gives you an idea, but it can take a long time, and the clients get tired out by it. Police officers tend to pick good lawyers. They fight hard. And if nothing's going to happen, why waste your time? Now, some people say, look, the main thing I want is I want accountability. I want the officer to be punished. And well, the only way to do that would be by filing an internal complaint. So they do it. But, it doesn't, in most departments, you look at the sustained rate, and the sustained rate is very low for complaints filed by civilians. Much, much higher if the complaint is internal. So if you're disrespectful to your lieutenant, you're going to be disciplined. But if you're disrespectful to somebody on the street, you're not, unless it's on video or unless the person happens to be a member of the select board or something like that, or, it's not going to happen. So it's sad, it's cynical, but it reflects the reality currently. I'd love to see it change. And like I said, I don't think Brookline's had those level of problems, which is a good thing. But
so what about alternative dispute resolution type stuff? I mean, we definitely have a pretty substantial, we don't have a super high volume of complaints, but a substantial portion of them fall into the rudeness category, like you've said, where basically there are no witnesses, there's a civilian and there's an officer, and it's sort of one person's word against another. This sort of, ex ante, that complaint's not going to be sustained because there's no external evidence. And so a lot of times departments now are trying to mediate those complaints instead of have a kind of adversarial quasi-legal process. Do you think that makes sense? That it's better to just put two people in a room and have them talk it out with a mediator?
Well, Boston tried to do that, and the police officers weren't cooperative. But, I'm not sure that just because two people say different things, it can't be resolved. We have judges and juries deciding that all the time. Many, many years ago, I'm now going back to maybe to the 70s. Robert DeGracia was the police commissioner in Boston, and there was a complaint. A women's softball team had the field at the Boston Common, and a police softball group kicked them off the Common. And he overturned a decision because he said that they had said that the police officers used a word, I'm not even going to use it. And he said, that's the kind of word that is typically used by Boston police officers. I think that the women's claim has credibility. Plus, they had reserved the time, and they were kicked off the field by police officers, which right away should tell you that this is a violation. So, you have to look at it carefully and critically. And just because one person is a police officer doesn't mean that they're telling the truth, because are they really going to want to say, yes, I, swore at this person? Probably not.
Let me ask a question. I mean, in many institutions, the larger they are, the less they're able to be controlled. Do you think that there's a way of looking at problems with policing in terms of the size of the department? I mean, Boston's a big, unruly, undisciplined department. Would Brookline have different types of problems than a department like that?
You'd hope so. However, I've had so many clients from small towns. I thought we could get maybe a game show and each one could try to convince the audience that they had the worst small town police department. Because in small towns, sometimes there'll be like one faction supports the old chief, another supports the new chief. And some very strange things happen in smaller departments. You would hope that, like, if somebody was really brutal, that in a smaller department that would stand out. In a town like Brookline, I think the citizens would be complaining. They'd say, wait a second, this guy is like his third brutality complaint. I don't think that would, in this particular town, I don't think that would work very well. Even if you're not sustaining them, that's a problem. Some towns, everybody knows. And to me, one of the worst things is the judges know, the DAs know. Somebody comes in, they've been beaten up, it's assault and battery on a police officer, and everyone knows, oh, that was Officer Jones, right? So it's a tough thing because there's a whole system that has not been functioning. But in Brookline, again, it has. I haven't heard of a heavy-handed Brookline police officer that everyone feels has a reputation. It does exist in some of the smaller towns, unfortunately.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands raised.
Well, I wanted to ask one other question before I kind of yield. So one thing I've been wondering a lot about, in part because of what happened in Newton earlier this month, where 2 police officers shot and killed a man who had a knife, is sort of use of force around people who have some weapon but don't have a gun. And kind of, it's hard to figure out how to articulate this exactly right, but there's definitely my instinct as a civilian who doesn't know a ton about this, but knows some about this, is that when there are 4 officers and there's one person who doesn't have a gun, you can probably diffuse the situation without killing the person. I mean, I wasn't there. I'm sure there's complexity to this, but I'm just wondering if you have a kind of general comment on these kinds of situations, because it seems like a non-trivial amount of officer-involved shootings in Massachusetts involve people with knives. And I'm just curious what you think about the sort of risk to officers in those kinds of situations where a civilian has a knife but doesn't have a gun.
Well, like this situation in Newton, a lot of times it's what happened before that got the officers into that situation. I mean, obviously, if somebody's mentally ill, intoxicated, whatever, that they're not thinking rationally, you probably don't want to corner them in a room and then get close to them. But once you've done that, if somebody's close enough to stab you with a knife, you don't have to like get sliced before you use force, right? And police officers can use a higher level of force. But that Newton case to me is an example of acting too hastily. They were told it was a robbery. Turns out it wasn't. They chase him to his place, and then they kind of trap him. They're in his apartment, and he's in his home, and it turns out to be a situation where if you looked at the point of the shooting, you might say, what else could they do? But when you look back and say, well, how could they have avoided getting into that position? There's a lot that can be done. And one of the biggest problems for police departments in general is dealing with the mentally ill. And it's a problem with the prisons too, because we don't have mental hospitals. We don't have a proper system for handling people who are mentally ill. And so it falls to police officers and corrections officers. Neither one of them are equipped for that. So that creates problems.
Elizabeth.
Mr. Friedman, thank you so much for coming and talking to us.
Sure.
I feel like you're talking about the culture of our Brookline Police Department, and that some of the things you see in other places that you end up trying to advocate for victims, you haven't really had to do that here. And I'm thinking about the things that we do here already that help the culture be what you're talking about, I think. And I just wondered, I know you've lived here many years, and I wonder what you think. I mean, there's police size, there's that we already do mediation, there's that a lot of our police officers live here and are our neighbors. I just wondered if you could help us think about those things that work to give us this culture that seems to be good for Brookline, and what things you, in your years of being here, you would say, wow, if we could do that, it would make it even better. You have this perspective that I would really appreciate hearing.
Well, I think all the things you said are true. It's also true that, it's a town which has a lot of highly educated people, a good number of people who are relatively wealthy. And as I said, police officers pick on people who are powerless. And so you don't know who people are, but a lot of people in this town have power. They know how to file a complaint. They know how to get hold of somebody. And that means a bully would not really necessarily want to pick on them. And so, of course, racial profiling is the problem. And some of it, it may not be the police officer. I mean, I had a situation on a Jewish holiday, which is a holiday for Boston schools. I'm walking with my neighbor in our, a block or two from my house. And an Orthodox Jew came up to me. I'm Jewish. He asked me if I would call the police because there was an African-American boy, maybe 2 of them, riding their bicycles in our neighborhood. And my neighbor and I were like, no, we will not do that. It's a school holiday. They're riding their bicycles. But that's the sort of thing that if I had called, then a police officer would have to come check it out. There's something suspicious, and so that sort of thing happens here. And I'm sure sometimes there's racial profiling, and sometimes there's police responding to maybe citizens who are concerned, who are racially profiling people, because we don't have walls up on our border. We're not going to build a wall. There's 2 houses before you hit Boston from my house. So come on. So I think that's that's where you get a problem. And it could also be sometimes a problem with police officers, seeing somebody who looks out of place. Why is this person who looks like he doesn't belong in this neighborhood here? But it's also that's one problem of our citizenry that I have seen.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. Any other questions? Marty again. Oh, wait, Dwayne raises his hand. Why don't we let Dwayne go?
Yeah. You talked about our bondsman, do you know any towns that utilize that in Massachusetts?
No, I'm not aware of it. And Marty sort of raised it to me. And when I thought about what happens in internal affairs and how once those interviews are done, that becomes the record pretty much. I know you could have a de novo hearing here, the board of select people, whatever, but that doesn't happen. So you got it. And once people see the record, you look at it and go, you think that's the truth. So I've not heard it being done, but it sounds like a good idea. And as a lawyer in internal affairs, my role is just to be there for my client and make sure nobody really is harassing them. I can tell you many years ago, I was representing somebody in the town of Haverhill at a disciplinary hearing as a witness. And the lawyer for the town asked if I'd like to take over the prosecution. And I was like, no. I mean, I'd love to see that they discipline the officer, but that's not my job. And I don't know if it showed a reluctance on the lawyer to prosecute or what, but so I haven't heard of it, but it just seems to me like a good idea to have some help because people who are filing complaints don't know. I can tell you, I sometimes represent people at internal affairs hearings. Often they're my clients, but sometimes if somebody calls up just to see how things are going, it's typically in Boston, of course, we'll represent them. And of course, if I'm representing them, things are a little different than if they don't have representation. The officers are more likely to not harass my client, not kind of cross-examine them and go over their whole criminal record and kind of attack them. So that's my answer.
Marty, did you?
Yeah, just a couple of things. On the last point, I did share with Howard one of the original proposal that I made about the advisory committee, which was basically a spin-off of the issue of having an ombudsman. So we just didn't call it that. But just to a very simple question, and then one that's pretty simple, but not quite as simple. Does the name Sam Walker ring a bell to you, or someone who's written about?
Written about police accountability, very famous textbook. I've read it, yes.
Okay, because I'm going to share with everyone an article that he recently in 2020. I'm going to read one sentence. The more I studied this topic, the more skeptical I became about the effectiveness of civilian review boards. So I'll share the article with everyone later, but I just wanted to establish that you know of him. And the other question is just slightly more complicated, but to what extent do you think having a more diverse police department is important for purposes of especially the profiling issue and say like motor vehicle stops? Do you think it helps a little?
I think it would help on profiling, but in the end, police officers tend to be blue as opposed to black or white. And I can tell you a war story. My first police misconduct trial was two young African-American brother and sister. Their father was a plumber. They were driving a very nice car. They pulled into a gas station. I think she was a college student. And these two young black men in t-shirts and dungarees say, "Hey, you, stop. So they started running. They didn't know who they thought. They were hoodlums. They were Boston undercover cops. The young woman fractured her wrist, and I lost before the jury. And I think I lost because the jury didn't think that black police officers would hurt an African-American couple. And so they did. And they assume, when undercover cops unfortunately assume that everybody knows who they are because all the people who they would order, the drug people, know who they are. And if you don't know who they are, this sort of thing can happen. So it's not that race alone will do it, but I think in terms of profiling, yes, I think if you have African-American police officers, they understand that, hey, people like them can be in the town of Brookline, and that's not suspicious. And, they have to deal with the citizens who somehow think that it is.
Okay, thank you again for coming.
Sure.
I see Raj has his finger up. Raj, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So first I want to say, of all the guests we've had, your analysis, your comments, in my opinion, have been extremely good. And my only other question is, are you open to receiving an email on a question? And obviously, Bernard will get that same thing.
Well, thank you. And of course.
Okay, that's all I have.
I ask one quick follow-up about the ombudsman. So
Yeah.
what would, so, you know, we have a medium-sized department, maybe like 90 officers. What would the ombudsman be doing most of the time? What would the ombudsman's role be?
Well, that's a question as to whether, is it a full-time employee or just somebody who's there to assist? And I don't know if you need a full-time person. And could somebody be picked for each? If you have 8 cases, 10 cases, even a dozen cases, you're not going to have a full-time or even a part-time employee. So I don't know, and that's something to think about. Who would it be? Very, very young lawyer, volunteer? I don't know. But somebody who knows enough about questioning and who has enough, like I wouldn't want a law student because they might not have enough gravitas to really stand up and say, whoa, wait a second, or to ask other questions. But it would involve, talking to the person so that before they're interviewed, to learn what they're going to say, and also to think about, well, what claims you might have. I mean, obviously people call me up and they think their claim is A, and maybe it is, and there's B, C, and D as well, or maybe A, really what they really think is their claim isn't actually it. There may have been some other violation, or at least there may be something more important. So you need somebody with enough knowledge to know that. But I just, like I say, there aren't enough complaints to have a full-time person.
So, well, presumably this person could also look at policies, could look at, disparities in traffic stops or citations or something, like not necessarily just complaints. But I was more curious. Yeah, that's really what I was curious about is what roles this person could have besides assisting in the complaints process, and whether there was a precedent for that. I mean, larger departments do have like auditor agencies, like entire agencies whose job is to audit the police department. And maybe that's something we could try to look at. But again, it's just trying to figure out what to do with a community of our size that is not huge, but isn't tiny either. So I'm curious whether you had any perspective on that, like a civilian reviewing policing policies on an ongoing basis, or looking at traffic stops on an ongoing basis, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, you need to be a civilian who actually understands the law and knows something about policing. So that's sort of a tough thing to find, I guess. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Bernard, may I make a suggestion as far as this goes? Is that
Sure.
once we have agreed on either one or two versions of the police commissioner advisory committee, I'm assuming, in light of Howard's answer to Raj and how helpful he's been over now 4 decades, that he'd be willing to take a look at that and give us some feedback about it once we have it done, because I do think it's incorporates the general notion of ombudsman. So I'm not even asking that as a question, because I'm taking.
Well, we have to ask him if he's willing to do it.
All right. Ask
Yeah. Of course I'll look at it. But give me more than like 24 hours, Marty.
No, I know. Next time. That was, I didn't know till Monday that
I'm just pulling. Don't respond.
I'm used to it, but I didn't know till Monday that we had an opening.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Friedman.
Sure, you're welcome.
Very, very helpful, and it looks like we're going to be reaching out to you in the future.
Okay, thanks a lot.
We'll try to be respectful of your time and other obligations.
Well, you're all
we
volunteers
appreciate
as well, so I understand that, and I'm glad to help out.
Yeah.
I just want him to know that I did not think of that as a possibility. So it was not even implicit bias on my part.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I appreciate your presentation and the examples, for example, you gave as well as your insights in many of the things that we're looking at. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Bye now.
Should have told him he's welcome to stay for our meeting.
Oh, I should have. I'm sorry. Sure, he has other things to do. Okay, so that I think that was very helpful. Let's move on to our subcommittee updates, and in making those updates, give us a sense of how far along you are with your committee reports, issues that still are outstanding. I want to just make let you know that the tough study that the Reimagining Subcommittee had done here in Brookline is relatively ready. There is a report on the findings of the survey, and I think it's available to our committee. So I urge everyone to look at that. The first 12 pages is really what you need to look at. The remainder, at least on my copy, was just the survey questions that were used. So, I urge people to look at that. Also, next time we're going to be hearing from the Community Outreach Subcommittee on their survey of the Walk and Talk survey of residents of Brookline housing with respect to the Walk and Talk program. So, and I think that Casey will be mentioning something about that when her subcommittee report comes up. So let's start off with accountability.
Bernard, may I ask a question about the survey from Tufts?
Yeah.
Do you know if,
well, to the extent I know.
well, all right, I guess the question is, and I don't know if anyone else present knows the answer. I know Janice has been following both committees diligently. Anyway, are they still awaiting more responses? Because the number that I saw was 1,151. 1,343. Does anyone know if that's the end of it?
I don't know, but Raul is
Okay.
listening in. So if he'd like to, tell us if he's still here.
Well, that's all right. I'll find out. Maybe
That's the correct number. So
I'm here if you can hear me. Yes, that's the right number.
Okay. Okay. Let's start with the Accountability Subcommittee. Thank you, Raul.
yeah.
Michael.
So first, I'll just say, in the context of, since Raul's here, I wanted to apologize that he's being attacked by anonymous people in a really vulgar way. I think that's despicable, and I appreciate the work he's doing and the task force is doing. But on the topical note of the Accountability Subcommittee's update,
by the way, before you go, people may not know the context. I mean, he's been subject to vicious social media and other attacks by telephone calls, I think emails, etc. Sort of the typical way that the right wing in this country deals with disagreement, and we see that it's come to Brookline or come to Massachusetts. So that's sort of the context of what Michael has said.
Yeah. As far as the subcommittee updates, we're still working broadly on the three things that I mentioned last time. This kind of civilian oversight board, what we're calling the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee, which would both be a kind of internal review of investigations by the IAO, so a group of civilians who would read those reports and scrutinize them for timeliness, accuracy, thoroughness, and appropriate weighing of evidence, and also would sort of more broadly study policing policies in Brookline and recommend the select board as police commissioners to make changes as appropriate to those policies, among other things. So we're still working on a draft of that. I think we have a decent copy of a draft, but Marty, we need to reconcile Marty's feedback with what Bernard and I have been working on, which was spawned by Marty's feedback. So Marty is somehow both in this process and externally criticizing this process, but we'll get him on board. And then second is changes to the complaints policy. I mean, we're continuing to work on that. Most recently this time, like between the last meeting and now, We've talked a lot about mediation as an alternative way of resolving complaints, especially less serious complaints, like complaints about rudeness, of which, which are probably about half of Brookline's complaints. And often for which there are no external witnesses, so it's very difficult to sustain a complaint. And from learning what other communities have done, it seems, complainants and officers tend to find this process more satisfying or less dissatisfying than a kind of adversarial process, which often doesn't sustain complaints. So that's, broadly the complaints policy is what we're working on, but that's one thing we've focused on the last couple of weeks. And then finally, Ron in particular has been continuing to work on the civilian feedback form, this kind of customer service survey. And I believe, well, maybe Ron can just update us on that, but I think it's pretty close to being, something we can all vote on.
Yeah, it's very close. In fact, the last thing I'm waiting for is for Michael Towney as the town legal person to take a look at what we've done. We have both the form and we have a set of policies and procedures associated with using the form. And I've just asked Michael to take a look at that before we're ready for voting. And he said he hopes to have that done midweek this week, which means I'm hoping that he give me some feedback maybe tomorrow, by tomorrow or Friday. Hi, Michael.
How you doing? Yeah, so you will be getting that. I think by tomorrow. I do have some. I was looking at it today, so I should be able to get back to you tomorrow. I know that the personnel subcommittee is waiting for a civil service report for me too, so I'm sort of balancing the two right now. But I think I'll be in touch with you by tomorrow, Ron, and perhaps we can coordinate a phone call, you and I, because I do have some follow-up questions related to it as well.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, sounds good.
All right, so I'll reach out to you directly.
Okay, good.
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
before Marty asks his question or makes his point, I did want to pose a question to Ann Brodra since she's here, and I've been meaning to reach out but haven't yet been able to. So I was wondering what kind of capacity or skill or expertise there is right now in the HR department for mediation. I can't quite recall if when you met with us in October, when you described the complaints process there, if mediation was something that y'all worked on. And I was just curious if that expertise already existed in town staff in the human resources department. So, yeah.
So between the three of the 7 staff that we have probably almost 75 years of experience in HR. And I will say that probably 90% of the work that we do is mediation related and problem solving. And that's hopefully, knock on wood, the reason why as few things go to litigation as possible. So when we work with interpersonal issues and things like that, where it is a miscommunication, we do that all the time. And to comment on Howard Friedman's discussion, where you have the at least in his experience, the types of questions that are asked by complainants and how they're treated versus the types of questions that are asked of police officers and how they're treated. I can't say to the firsthand experience of that. What I can say is, as we discussed in our meetings, is that from the HR process, we look at being a neutral fact finder and not being on the town employee's side or another town employee's side, is that we're looking for the facts. And so we ask tough questions on both sides. So that's something that, to your first point on mediation, we do it on a regular basis, I believe. And Caitlin can correct me, she's also on the call, is that both Lloyd and Caitlin have done formal mediation training. I've done some coursework on it, both in law school and afterwards, as far as seminar work. I'm not a certified mediator, but I will say to anyone on the call who's a parent, you've been a mediator in that case as well, just in dealing with real world. But, it is something that we've done and that we're familiar with.
That's awesome. So I mean, we can follow up at some other time, but I think it would be really interesting to figure out how we could link this expertise with the police department. They sometimes do use mediation to resolve complaints, but it sounds like, and, I have no way of evaluating how good they are at it. I'm sure they're just fine at it, but it sounds like this is something y'all do a lot more frequently. And there might be a way to link these processes in a way that's fruitful without sort of creating redundancies. So I'd like to, follow up. But thank you so much for your comments.
You're welcome.
Elizabeth?
I just want to follow up. We in the Personnel Committee, Subcommittee have been discussing how the mediation works in the police department. And particularly we were interested if the police refuse to attend like they do like we had heard in Boston. And I think I think Dan, we had asked Dan actually that, and I don't think he could remember a single time. Maybe I'm wrong, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you couldn't remember a single time when a police officer's refused to participate in mediation. And we do that already with professional mediators, correct? I just want to be sure I'm saying, reflecting our conversation correctly.
I don't think that was specifically, the question was specifically about mediation itself, but it was to sit down and talk to the IA investigator.
Yes, and
So
yes.
mediations, I would have to say there probably were times when an officer did not want to go into mediation with the person that complained about them. And I don't think that's unusual. I'm sure complainants didn't want to go in with police either. So
I stand corrected on that piece, but the IA, it sounds like, was fine. Okay.
Okay, Raj?
Unmute yourself, Raj.
So I have a totally unrelated question to what's going on.
Wait a
Dan-
minute, if it's unrelated, why are you asking it now?
Dan, where did you get that jacket?
It's a sweater.
it's a sweater. Thank you very much. I think that was a compliment, Raj.
Yes, of course, it's meant that way.
Okay.
I don't know. I can't see.
You
Okay.
can email it to me, text me, whatever.
So it looks like the Accountability Committee is well positioned to present a report that includes those three areas. And you may want to make a recommendation along with the Personnel Committee and the Civil Rights Subcommittee to continue work with respect to reviewing the policy manual of the police department.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay, good.
Before we move on to the next subcommittee, could I just ask a question? I mean, this was one of the questions I was going to ask Ron just on our individual discussion, but since the full accountability subcommittee is on here, I figured I'd just ask now. With respect to the civilian complaint feedback form, or then that policy and procedure that goes along with it, has there been discussion as to whether or what the interplay would be with respect to the civilian complaint process? Because it sort of goes hand in hand in a way. What the effect of the feedback form would be if it's someone complaining about police interactions, or it could be about talking about good interactions too, of course. But
the way we last left it is on the final page of the civilian feedback form. There is a line that says if you want to file a formal complaint or a formal recommendation, there are links to those forms, and we provide the links to those forms. But at this particular point, that's the only connection that we've got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Okay, see Marty?
Myself, yeah. I think for some reason, I think we're all muted, but I guess we have to unmute. Yes, so anyway, so just getting back to that last question, I'd give one other answer unrelated to the form, which is that the department has the option of initiating an investigation on anybody, even if the person filling out the form chooses not to. So if something came to the attention of anyone in the department about somebody alleging misconduct, and even if they don't file the complaint themselves, then there can be a complaint, a investigation about them. But I had one other issue I wanted to get back to, and it relates to Michael's report and also the question he asked Ann Braga. The two big things that Bernard and Michael and I need to talk about, the differences between my current proposal and theirs, is the adding more explicitly about the liaison process, which I'm assuming that they're open to. But the other one is their proposal right now talks about referring cases as appropriate to the Human Resource Department. And I don't remember, I know we had a very good session with you, it seems like years ago, but it's probably about 2 months ago, talking about the differences between the two sets of processes. And maybe now is not the time to try to hash this out. Maybe it's at a subcommittee meeting or between the four of us. I'm still pretty confused on if someone walks into like the diversity office where I'm hoping most complaints will be filed, how they know when to send something to you versus something to the complaint for an investigation by Internal Affairs. And that's kind of, to some extent, the issue that came up in that Amy Hall case, although there were other things that came up there. And at some point, we need to focus on that. It may have to be by the new standing committee. I just find it a pretty complicated issue.
Yeah.
You want to give a one-sentence answer, Ann, or should we hold off on that, Bernard?
Well, if Ann can give a one-sentence answer, that'd be great. If not, let's
okay, yeah,
refer that to Michael Zura.
Well, I will do my best as one lawyer to a bunch of other lawyers who are on this call, because it is hard for us to do that. The difference in sort of the jurisdiction, as I'll call it, is that police conduct as far as implementing the law, enforcing the law, would be in internal affairs. Interpersonal contact, and this could be harassment, discrimination, retaliation in the interpersonal context without looking at traffic stops and those kind of things, would come to HR.
Okay. Well, that's a helpful starting point, but it's going to lead to more confusion in my mind, but we'll
only
talk
gave
about
me one sentence, Marty.
I know,
Okay.
so we'll talk about it later.
Okay.
I'm happy. I'm very intrigued by that answer, and we'll pursue it later.
Okay, good. Okay, next, or I'm not gonna take any more questions on accountability. Civil rights.
Sorry, Bernard, this is just a quick reminder that folks should try and be muted if they're not speaking, and then unmute before they speak.
Okay.
Thanks.
Civil rights, militarization, and mass events. Paul Yee. And let me just add, I have given the subcommittee a report prepared by the Surveillance Technology and Military Type Equipment Committee of the town that's been around for a while. And that report is ready. I just want the subcommittee and anyone else to suggest any additional recommendations that they would think would be appropriate. But anyway, Paul, go ahead.
So we did have a lengthy meeting on the first go around on a rough draft of the subcommittee's report. All the subcommittee members contributed. There's more work to be done on the rough draft. Marty was able to attend and also contribute. I appreciate his contribution and input also. We'll have another meeting scheduled for February 1st, Monday at 1 o'clock. And there's more, as I said, there's more work to be done. And there's some parts that are still missing that we have to put together. So it isn't ready for prime time yet.
But it is available for anyone to review on Google Docs, which is way over my expertise. But let me just say that the report, even in its very unfinished form, is fascinating. I mean, it's very, very good. So, once we finalize that, it's going to be a really, really great contribution to the work of this committee. So, yes, Marty. You're muted, Marty.
Yeah, I just unmuted, I think. I will look for it. I don't remember getting it, and I'm happy to know that we have it. But the question I have, having not looked at it, is, as you know, I talked a little bit at your last meeting and about places in the policy manual that might be worth looking at to add something to try to discourage profiling and for field interviews and motor vehicle stops. And I guess I'm wondering if that kind of thing was in that report, or is that still something that could be added?
It's something that could be added. Casey did send a Google Docs to you during the meeting because you were at a disadvantage and you didn't have it in front of you. So I think towards the end of the meeting, she sent it all out.
Well,
Could Casey, could you send that Google Docs with instructions to Devin? And maybe Devin doesn't need instructions, but I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and of course that in that way we can quote, deliberate, unquote, by giving our comments to the document while at the same time giving the public access to both our comments as well as anything else. So, anything else, Paul?
Nope.
Okay. Any questions, comments? I don't see any. Next, community outreach, youth, non-traditional roles. Casey, are you here?
So we met, I think it was a week ago, Friday, maybe a week ago, Thursday. We heard from Lieutenant Pastor, who updated our committee on the work of the crisis intervention team and the crisis intervention training and the work of our social worker, Annabelle Lane, who's embedded in our department. It was a really helpful update for those of our committee who are not already familiar with the work of the CIT program and the training and our work with Annabelle. We also discussed that we have been successful in creating a homelessness task force for Brookline. I know I updated previously that to date, the dealings with our homeless population have been primarily have fallen to the police department, and we recognize as much as anyone that that's not the best place for that it really needs a comprehensive collaborative approach from many agencies within our town. And so we will be hosting this week our first inaugural task force meeting on homelessness. And we will have members from the library, the Department of Public Works, Brookline Housing Authority, the Health Department, and Brookline Community Mental Health, and the police department at that first meeting to talk about the state of homelessness in Brookline and move forward with hopefully putting together a collaborative approach to how we work with our homeless in Brookline. Tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning, we'll be hearing from Caitlin Starr, who is going to give us a report on the walk-in talk survey that our subcommittee conducted of Brookline Housing Authority residents. That will be at 10:30 tomorrow morning. And I think many of us are really excited to hear from Caitlin and hear what the results look like. That's our update. Michael, Janice, anything additional to add?
Hey, by the way, do we know how many responses to the survey we have?
We had 70 survey responses. 2 have come in since they did the analyses. And so we're going to probably have an update again in another 2 weeks. It's a 9% response rate for the Brookline Housing Authority number of surveys that were sent out to residents. So we're happy with that response.
Oh, okay. So that's a good response rate. And as someone who knows nothing about this stuff, 9% is a good response rate for something like this.
It's not terrible. It's actually a bit more than the townwide survey that the task force did, which I think was around 5 or 6%.
Yeah, I believe theirs was a 5% for the sample size, which is 25,000. We surveyed all of the residents, sent them to every household, and so we're actually hearing from 9% of the total population, which I think, Janice, you probably have more to add. I know your background's in this.
Yeah, no, I think 5 to 6% is more typical in large social science surveying. So to be able to survey an entire population and get that kind of response is actually, it means that the data could be more reliable, although again, any data collection is self-selected. So it's always dependent on who chooses to respond to the survey.
Yeah, my main concern is that the survey responses are going to be overwhelmingly seniors who tend to probably have different experiences and attitudes than, adolescents. But at a certain point, it's just very challenging to hear from, especially adolescents. It's a huge issue in social science. So anyway,
Right.
we'll
So-
look at it and see what we can do.
Right, so the demographics will be important in terms of how many seniors there are in the population. So the breakdown of the universe is important to know, to be able to make some
And
sense.
a lot of the BHA population is seniors, but
56%.
yeah, the majority. So that's kind of interesting.
So
But
you'd expect more response from seniors. Yeah.
right. But anyway,
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the data,
Yeah.
and what the
Yeah.
results.
Me too.
I think, I would be most interested in seeing the comparison between youthful respondents and particularly women, mothers, because I think that will tell us something pretty interesting. Any other discussion of this?
Not on the survey, just I'll add that I've started some draft outlines of the preliminary report from our subcommittee, and was messaging with Michael that I'd like to get something to him shortly to review as well. We do still have a couple of outstanding areas that we were looking to delve into that we'll just continue on with our work, and as we're writing the preliminary report, continue to do our updates and looking at things like the emergency management and the CERT program. I think we discussed at our last meeting, and anything else that's on our agenda, we'll just continue to plug forward and delving into those as well.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, it would help me, and I think help other people, to just give a very brief outline of what your homelessness task force would do. What does it do that's helpful that's not being done now?
Well, tomorrow I think we're going to talk about that.
Okay, never mind.
So today, we do have, it's the police department right now is dealing on both ends with the homelessness issue, with really trying to support the homeless that we do have in Brookline. Officer Joe Amendola is our homeless person liaison, and he regularly checks in with our homeless and brings them like winter warm-up kits. He'll bring them food. He'll check in with them. At the holidays, he brought them meals. And when they are often in distress, they will ask and either call the police department or ask somebody on the street, like an officer on detail, if they can call him and have him come by and help them with something. And so he's become a real staple in the lives of some of our homeless and trying to support them. At the same time, we have residents who call in who are concerned about the state of homeless, who have set up camp in certain areas. And if anyone had been by 525 Harvard Street, just before Christmas, there was a homeless gentleman set up there who was taking up a lot of space. He had collected a lot of items, and it really became a public health issue, more so than certainly a police issue. And Officer Amendola was going and trying to, work with him to, set goals and agreements that he would not create such a public health crisis in that area. And the neighbors were really distraught. Someone was trying to sell a condo, and they were, worried that people were coming in and seeing this homelessness encampment set up across the street, and their children were fearful, and it caused, I know, a lot of calls to our dispatch center, a lot of calls to our administration, calls to town hall. So there's concerns from the community and quality of life issues for the community, and then there's concerns about the well-being and the safety of our homeless and needs that they have. And so the police department's been trying to kind of mitigate both of these, and I think it would be much better served with having the health department more closely involved, Brookline Community Mental Health. Oftentimes when the library was open pre-COVID, our homeless would spend a lot of time in those buildings, and bringing people together that are intersecting with the homeless and should be able to assist in supporting the homeless and also the community.
Okay, thank you. Raj.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
My question is, on this BHS survey, is there a breakdown by the racially, the information is broken down by racial?
I do believe Caitlin has broken down by race and gender and ethnicity and length of time living in housing into the survey, and she can correct me if I'm wrong. They will be released tomorrow. And then also the overall demographics of Brookline housing, which I believe that not only is it 56% of Brookline Housing Authority are residents over 65. I think it's the same percentage as our white residents. I think it's also 56%. And so that will be, I believe, incorporated into Caitlin's report, which she'll be releasing and giving us an overview of tomorrow morning.
Great.
Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Let's move on.
I have a quick question for Casey. Approximately how many homeless do we have in Brookline?
So we actually are doing a homelessness count. I believe it's actually happening overnight tonight as part of a statewide study that is, or at least a regional study. Elizabeth, you may know more about this, that is looking into, they take one night and do a count of your homeless so that we don't count tonight and then tomorrow our homeless that was maybe, you know, at 525 Harvard moved up to Commonwealth Ave and get counted again. We don't have a tremendously large number of homeless in Brookline, but the residents that we have, I think that Officer Amendola had something around 90 calls for service for one individual just this fall. And so there's some that can generate a lot of work for agencies that are looking to support, and you know, the Department of Mental Health does come out and work with our homeless as well. We have an individual who also shares time with Cambridge, and they have an enormous homeless population, which we do not have. And so it's been a little bit hard to get more services just because of our sheer numbers. We do have a handful of regular homeless individuals that we've been working with off and on for years. I would say at any given time, it's probably less than 10. But again, we had one individual that accounted for something like, I think, close to 90 phone calls to the police department from the community just throughout the fall.
Thank you.
Bernard?
Yes.
Yeah,
Marty.
that was basically the question I wanted to ask, but let me just follow up on the same thing. When you say under 10, I think it's the way you phrased it. Are you talking winter or summer? I assume it varies, or does it not?
So it seems that during COVID, we have seen an increase in homeless coming into the community. But I would say, I don't know that our homeless population increases or decreases in the winter versus summer months. Just anecdotally thinking of the residents that I know we're working with, many have been here for a very long time. And we have some that actually are not homeless, but maybe in like a Pine Street home that are partially, you know, so they're supported with housing, but they often choose to live on the street, even though they'll have an address in the community. So, you know, there are some supports through those organizations to work with service providers. But again, we found that, you know, it's limited and it's a bit hit or miss. And certainly, you know, after 5 o'clock or on weekends, it's very hard to find support services for these people.
And Bernard, may I ask one other question relative to homeless? Have you been thinking, Casey, or the subcommittee, about what's the alternative to having police for dealing with the homeless individuals? Because that seems to be much a simpler issue than mental health or traffic stops, for instance.
Right. Well, there's a lot of overlap, Marty, as I know you know, between homeless and with mental illness.
Right.
But yeah, certainly that's, you know, what I'm hoping to get out of our task force is some ideas and some best practices with, you know, serving our homeless and also balancing that with community needs and community health. And so that's what I'm hoping we're going to be able to start talking about tomorrow and really move forward with putting a plan together that is more of a collaborative approach. I mean, certainly there will always be calls to the police department, you know, at night or on weekends, either somebody wanting a well-being check or, you know, a trespassing issue or, you know, sometimes without the location of a place to relieve themselves. There are, you know, calls that will come to us for things like that, which Michael sent me a link for the Portaloo, which is on my agenda to speak about tomorrow, which are portable restrooms, which I think we also said could be helpful for, other residents and whatnot that are out and about in our community that may need to use restrooms. But yeah, that's what I think, we have really struggled thus far to find a better way to address homelessness in Brookline and to really have a commitment from those in our community that could probably do that work better. And so I do think that I got an entirely enthusiastic response from the department heads that I reached out to, who are almost all themselves actually participating and have not, delegated that down. It may work, form into more of a working group after our initial couple of meetings. So hopefully I'll have a great update in 2 weeks on our progress after the meeting this week.
Great. So again, looks like your committee is going to be well positioned to have a report ready on the timeline we talked about. Thank you. That makes me feel good. Let's see, next, mental health and substance abuse. Elizabeth.
Probably a good follow on to Casey. And I would just make a comment about that prior conversation that so many of the people who are chronically homeless actually do suffer from mental illness and or addiction. And one of the things we're dealing with in our committee is that almost every system, medical and mental health, says if you can't reach somebody today, you call 911. So I think the police department has become the default 24 hours, 7 day a week crisis response for all of our medical and mental health services. And it's a challenge. But actually, the homelessness task force is a great approach to figuring out how we can respond without tying up our valuable officers.
Hey, can I just throw out a little piece of information that came up at the committee meeting that people will relate to? If you call your doctor, for an appointment, you're going to be told that if this is an emergency, call 911. And what is an emergency for some people is not always an emergency in the eyes of medical profession. So, we're burdening, that's a little example of how we're burdening the 911 system with unnecessary calls. So.
By the way, I just want to mention my healthcare provider, the recording always says life-threatening emergency, call 911, just to mention.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just think that
was the point I was making, Bernard, and you said it very well. That was the whole point. So our mental health substance abuse committee has been meeting almost weekly to try to catch up because we got a little bit of a late start. Last meeting, we met with the Boston Emergency Services team. Our focus right now is really on clarifying what we currently do in Brookline around mental health and substance abuse individuals and how to best help them from the police department and what we can improve on. And I think we should have a draft report to review at our meeting on Monday, this coming Monday, which is the 1st of February. And then I'm hoping that the following Monday, we can do an open mic discussion, maybe on the 8th. So we should be able to be on track with that. I mean, there's certain things that are coming up. One is just how much 911 is the default system for mental health emergencies. We have found that there might be some opportunities for improving, building on the things that we've done during COVID by necessity with telehealth and opportunities to improve that for the police. The other thing that we're learning is that although Brookline is incredibly progressive in dealing with these issues and has been for a couple decades, the models that are used around the country are not necessarily what would work here. And Brookline has been good at taking the best of multiple models and molding it to specifics that work in our town and in Brookline. So the idea of just importing another idea from a town that is much bigger than us, or might have an infrastructure that's different than ours, or might have a demographics that are different than ours, hasn't really, that isn't really how we have done things, and it hasn't worked. So we think that building on taking the best of multiple models is probably the best approach. Let me just see here. There are going to be opportunities for us to recommend to the whole committee or to the select board that we might get behind as a town certain legislative efforts to improve the mental health system and the back end, where we run into troubles with being able to refer people and get people treatment and have more sustainable emergency service systems. The aftercare is clearly our biggest problem. The police may respond in a 911 way, but getting those people into treatment so that they don't come back around again is one of the challenges. I think that's pretty much what I have to report. Our next meeting, we're going to be talking with, if possible, with the person for elder affairs liaison and hoarding, which are significant issues around mental health and substance abuse too.
Okay, don't leave because the next, I'm sorry, questions. Marty. I think you're muted, Marty.
Sorry. The question I have is whether is June Binney still participating? Because I know she's worked with the department.
Mm-hmm. She's one of our expert contributers.
That's what I mean. Okay. All right. Happy to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah. She and her husband, who also is has some incredible has an incredible background. So
yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Michael Kibney.
Just with how mental health and homelessness go hand in hand, I'm just curious, are there any like success stories that come out of this? Like what happens with most people in Brookline that are homeless or have mental health issues? Where do they generally go?
Well,
are there any stories?
Obviously there are people that we struggle with and continue to struggle with, but there are a couple very good stories where it was really the interface between our police officers being 100% trained in de-escalation and mental health first aid, and having incidents where a very bad outcome might have happened, but it didn't happen because the officer recognized that the person that they were involved with was more in need of help than they were in need of arrest or force. And I think we had an incident like that happen not very long ago, where I think it could have been a very bad outcome, and that what happened in Newton did not happen here. That officer put the car between themselves and the person realized that this person needed help much more than they needed force. So there are really good outcomes, and I don't know that can all be public. I don't know how that all works, but it's too bad it can't be public, because some of the things we do really do work.
Well, there are examples that have been reported in the press that can be made public. Yeah. I think it's important because, some people question whether, the de-escalation tactics that we're training police to use or other things are really worth it. And I think there's some very good examples of how worth it they are. Yeah. Casey, did you have a question?
So I just have two stories, or two success stories kind of come to mind immediately. We have one gentleman who I think is quite possibly a lifelong Brookline resident, and lived with his father, and after his death became homeless. And we have an officer from our department who went out of her way to work extremely closely with this gentleman to get him housed. He has mental health issues, significant medical issues, both systems which have failed him. And she provides him with a tremendous amount of support. And I think she cooks him meals and keeps in touch with him on a regular basis. But there was no other system that was able to support him. And she had just known him for many years as having been a resident. And it was really tragic when he became homeless and had no other resources. And the one gentleman that we've been most recently working with, who again has been, kind of causing a lot of stir in our community. I think, Marty, he was down in your neighborhood for a long time. And yep. And so he just this past week told Officer Amendola that he would be open to becoming housed, to having help in getting housing. And so he has been entirely resistant to that until now. His medical condition also is not great, and he's not eligible for housing in Brookline, unfortunately, due to some past situations. And so we're working with Department of Mental Health and trying to get him first into a shelter where he has to go for a period of time to show that he can maintain the housing. And so that's in the works now, which is really like a tremendous success story that I'm really hopeful that he continues to seek the help from our officer.
Yeah. So if we had a good social service system, police wouldn't have to do that. But since we don't, it's either the police do it or the guy, ends up really tragically dead or whatever. Elizabeth?
Bernard, I might make another point in response to your question, Mr. Keaveney, that the continuity here is really important. And I think that's come up in our committee a lot, how many of our officers have been here for decades and they have relationships with people over time. So I'm thinking about the case that Casey just talked about with Officer Amendola. That's because part of the reason that happened was because of a long-term relationship and being able to trust each other to make that difference. And I think it really speaks to how valuable it is for us to retain our police officers and be able to promote them effectively so that they stay in Brookline. It makes a huge difference also in getting services, because then they know when they make the phone call, they're just calling Mike on the other end of the line who knows them and will help them get that service. So it really became a very important point through all of these conversations.
Yeah. Of course, if we had social service people who could do that, that'd be great too. But then again, you have a problem of making sure that they stay around town long enough to develop those relationships. So
that's a very good point, Bernard. One of the big challenges in the whole mental health system is turnover.
Yeah.
And actually, it's one of the things that is really terrific in our public safety in Brookline. We're lucky that we have people who've been here for decades.
Yeah. I guess the point of that is that nothing is simple. Okay. Nothing's okay. Any other questions for the Mental Health Substance Abuse Subcommittee? Seeing none. Next is personnel. Oh, that's Elizabeth again.
Sorry. Okay. So at our last meeting, we spent most of the time working on making recommendations, which I know Bernard carried to the Accountability Subcommittee around the Police Commissioners Advisory Committee. And we also are working on the mission statement. We've gotten some input from people. We are going to tackle that more tomorrow to try to see if we can do a revised statement there. Michael Downey is working on our civil service component of our subcommittee report. And Paul, thank you very much, is helping us with the piece of our subcommittee report around the current state legislation of what's relevant to the personnel committee, subcommittee in Brookline. Tomorrow in our meeting, we're going to focus on officer health and wellness, which is another piece of our work. And hopefully out of that conversation, we'll be able to be very clear about our recommendations in that domain. I am hopeful that we will have a draft to review next week for the personnel subcommittee. I think we should be able to do that, and we probably will have to schedule an extra meeting next Thursday to review that, and then maybe we can do our open mic the following week, which is February 11th. So that's a proposed schedule, which we can discuss tomorrow at the committee meeting to see if that works for everybody.
Okay, any questions? Marty.
I owe you a phone call, Marty.
Okay. Do you have a question, Marty?
Yeah, no, I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, we owe each other a phone call. We've been planning to talk. The question, one thing that I just want to call to everyone's attention, which is one of the things that I want to talk to Elizabeth about, is that I was talking to Chief O'Leary about the diversity issue And he called something to my attention, which I had not been aware of, which is that, and I think he's given us some numbers on hiring people of color, which are pretty good, frankly. And in fact, I called to everyone's attention that I saw in articles about the formation of the Newton Task Force. How many people know how many people of color they had in their department before that task force?
Okay, this is not exam.
All right, well,
Just answer the question.
well, it'd be interesting if we could play that out, but I know we don't have time. The answer is 1, which was really shocking to me. That puts into perspective what I just said about our department. But the tougher question, which
Is that one black officer or one?
I forget what the it was a credible thing I found on Google. I can't remember if it was a news story or something from the formation of the committee, and I don't remember how it was phrased in answer to your question. So I don't remember, but my recollection is a person of color, is all I can tell you. But I could find that easily after we recess or after we adjourn. But the question becomes this, and the chief pointed this out, and last week, in fact, this week, it's the Brookline Patch, which published town salaries for every town employee, and they published overall income, which included things like overtime and details. And what the chief pointed out to me is that the diversity issue in Brookline that's more difficult is retaining officers and getting them to apply for superior positions, because when you look at especially the detail payments, it turns out that the increment for going up from patrol to sergeant, for instance, doesn't make that big a difference. And I'm hoping that Elizabeth's subcommittee can take a look at that a little bit, because I think we're doing better at the patrol level than we are at the superior officer level.
Marty, you're right about that. Bernard, you want to answer that? I was going to follow up with, we are going to include in our subcommittee report the data that Chief has given us about the diversity in the hires and we actually have a lot of information about the work the department has done on hiring and recruitment. It's quite impressive, actually. And you're right, there are issues with retention and promotions, and we've been talking about that and what might making some recommendations about what might help that.
Yeah, and by the way, I think we ought to ask Michael Keaveney to give his 2 cents on this. I'm sure he has a lot to say, and it's from the standpoint of the police union,
yeah.
But it's information that I think we need to factor into our report. We will ask you that, Michael. You don't need to answer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been advocating that, we need to improve upon the salaries in Brookline for a long time. There's clearly an issue. The last time we did a study on it trying to compare apples to apples, and we used multiple departments, and Cambridge was the most glaring. And you could leave Brookline and lateral over to Cambridge and get an instant $30,000 raise. That seemed to be seems troubling, just because officers talk and they know that they're the diverse officers in particular, they're very valuable. Every department wants them, and they're looking around, they're talking to their buddies, and they're making moves. Even if and this one's even more troubling, if a sergeant, a supervisor, first promotion, chose to go over to Cambridge, he would have to lose his stripes, his or her stripes, and become a patrolman. Yet that person would receive a significant pay raise and lose the responsibilities that they have to handle here in Brookline. That, to me, tells me there's an issue. If you could take a demotion, receive a pay raise, and lose a whole bunch of responsibilities, I don't see, we're just not competing. I mean, that's one example, but, and we looked at other departments too. We looked at Boston, which takes officers often. We looked at the state police. They often take officers. And now we're seeing other departments that you just never would have thought would take officers that are now taking officers from us. Everett, Weymouth, and, you know.
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple officers who have left it, and there's also the issue of, you know, what they perceive, at any rate, as the attitude of the town towards the police. So we should bear that in mind. Marty?
I want to follow up to what Michael just said. Do you have any idea how those communities compare on private detail remuneration? Because that was what was misleading about the Patch story. It did show the private detail payments for everybody, but it never made clear that those are, I believe, all paid by private companies. So, unless I'm mistaken, maybe there's some work that's municipal. I don't know. Am I correct that all the private details are paid privately, Chief or Michael?
I'll let the chief answer, but for the most part, yeah, the vast majority of details are
Okay, so my question was on those other jurisdictions. Do you have any idea how we compare in terms of that additional compensation, basically?
So we actually did look at that recently, and you know, it varies. Some departments are well ahead of us on detail pay and with different differentials with night, weekends, holidays. Brookline's, you know, one price right across the table, but you know, that's, I mean, definitely something that keeps cops look at. They see it and they know that in the other departments they have much more opportunity. You know, and with details in particular, you know, one thing that is positive about the details is, you know, the officers, you know, do it voluntarily, and it's on their days off and their time off, and it's you're not forced to do it. But one great aspect about it is the town also benefits from these officers. There's a fee that's included, and the town basically gains money from every single detail a police officer does for a private contractor. The town benefits as well.
Yeah, so I think, you know, there's just a lot of factual information that will be in Personnel Subcommittee's report, just to lay that out, you know, not making any judgment, just laying it out. Casey, you had your hand up?
I guess I just had a quick question for Michael that in terms of looking at that report that's published, and it's published every year and lists officer salaries along with other salaries across the town. Are we the only department in which work additional to our assignment as police officers or town employees is included? For instance, you know, teachers who do tutoring on the side, or firefighters who own businesses, or members of town hall staff that, you know, teach at universities. Are those salaries also included in that spreadsheet, or is it the police department the only one?
So, you know, with the police work, everything is included, but like, you know, for example, the only thing you can really compare it to is the firefighters. You know, many firefighters, electricians, plumbers, and contractors, they work on the side. That money isn't viewed, you know, they all work additional jobs as well, but you know, that doesn't show up because it's not in the public domain.
By the way, Bob Sable, did you have a question? I think you had your hand up. Are you muted?
I had a question earlier about homelessness, but it got answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry I missed you. Okay, anything else about this? So I think we have a good sense of where we are with our subcommittee reports, and it looks like we're going to be well positioned to complete at least the initial iteration of this report. As Marty keeps reminding us, you know, there may be work that will go on into the fall and you know, subsequent years maybe, but you know, we're well positioned to have a report for the March 2nd meeting of the select board. But keep working and having subcommittee meetings in order to get the details done on your subcommittee reports. Now, I proposed a special meeting on February 24th, which would mean that we would have a period of time when we'd have a meeting each week. Does anyone object to that? I think it's necessary in order to get our work done. Okay, so hearing no objection, that's what we'll do. The other thing is, do you want to meet on February 3rd? Is there a need for that, or can we just complete all of our work through the subcommittees? Okay, I see heads shaking no, so. Okay, yeah.
I have one question from earlier, just very brief.
Okay, wait, before you say that, so let me just make a note or state that our next meeting will be February 10. So, I mean, of course, we'll put out the agenda, but just want to make sure that that's clear to everyone. Marty, yes.
A question and a comment. A question to Paul Yee. He mentioned the meeting the 1st, and I'm hoping that either he or Devin can get me on to that list, because I didn't know about that. And that brings me to another question, the time, because accountability meets at 5 on the 1st. Can you someone tell me the time of that on the 1st?
The time of the meeting is 1 o'clock, and
Okay.
I only posted it a couple of hours ago.
Okay.
I just got the agenda.
That's fine. And Bernard, I want to make one other comment on something you said earlier, if you don't mind.
Okay. No.
I too have followed the issue of Raul, and I don't condone in the least anything. And I certainly believe that he's had hateful communications, and that's a bad thing. And unfortunately, it's happening too much in our society. However, I do believe, and I want to say this partly for the benefit of Casey and Michael, that he used a very, very poorly chosen word about the events in Washington, which none of us condone either. But the word support, that anyone who supports the so-called former president should not be a police officer. I think that was a very poor choice of words. And I just want to say that for the record.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to ask an unrelated question.
Sure.
I just wanted to confirm that somebody was actively exploring the topic of, dash and body cameras, because it doesn't seem to me that any of our subcommittees are doing that. And I wanted to know whether there was some other body that was looking at
I think
this.
it's the military committee.
Yeah, the Surveillance Technology Military Equipment Committee.
Got it. Okay. And then one other thing.
Bernard and myself are on that committee as well.
Okay. Maybe this is not something to talk about here, but I'm just curious. So are we looking for a new police chief? And what is that process like? We have an acting.
Mr. Kleckner's here. I don't know the answer to that. But if he wants to answer, okay, no.
I'm just curious.
I'm sure at some point we'll gear up to that, but we're not geared up yet.
Okay.
Bernard, I can respond if you want me to briefly.
Sure. I mean, a lot of people are asking.
Well, I was pretty clear when we made the acting appointment that we're going to take some time for a couple reasons. One is that the environment, especially at that time, but continues to be very volatile, and didn't feel like it was a great market to go out and seek chiefs of police. There were a lot of resignations that were happening at that time, as you may know. And so the other thing I think is we wanted these two committees to develop some recommendations and to try to frame the kind of chief that we want to go out and look for. Perhaps it's internal as well, but we would certainly do a search as we've done in the past, and just didn't think it was time. I don't know when it's time. The acting chief, Chief Morgan, is fine to be there for a while. That's something I coordinated with him before we appointed him. So no hurry. We're interested in watching Newton. As you may know, I think it was alluded to, they're doing a search for a chief as well as doing a task force. So for a long-winded response to, we're taking our time right now.
Yeah, and that's helpful because obviously if our feedback is expected to inform that search, we might want to consider providing some feedback to that effect. So I will personally think about that, and maybe some other, subcommittees will think about that. So thank you for that update.
Yeah. Elizabeth?
I just had not on the chief search question. I just had two things I wanted to ask Bernard. The first one was, I just wanted to thank you, Marty. I didn't understand what that conversation had been about. I didn't know anything about this uncivil discourse that was happening in our town. But I really appreciate you saying that. And I think it's really important to remember President Biden was very clear that those people in his inaugural address, that the 74 million who supported Trump are not our enemies. They are Americans also. And I really thought the president was quite clear about that. That is obviously people who are not rioting, but I would not, there's no condoning that. But I think it was, the president set a very good tone on that, and I would hope we could set that same tone in Brookline. And the second thing I just wanted to say was, which I just forgot, was, yes, I just forgot. Oh no, before we talked about that, it was the survey, the tough survey. I just wondered, Bernard, if you could just say for people who might be on publicly or watching publicly, how people in the public can access the results of that survey, or if somebody could know that. I think it's a good opportunity for people who are watching on Big to know how they can see what happened with those survey results.
My understanding is that it's posted on the webpage of the task force. I think that's how I found it. Pardon me?
Yes. So all of you have the raw data and the analysis done by Eitan Hirsch in your OneDrive folder, which is your private materials for all of these meetings. It is publicly posted through the task force agenda for their upcoming meeting on Friday, and it's hyperlinked under the Tufts survey update. So anyone who is familiar or maybe not familiar with our agenda management system can go to agendas and minutes under government, which you can access from the front page of our website. And then all of the agendas are linked there, and you can search using the task force to reimagine policing to find any and all of their meetings.
Thank you, Devin.
Marty.
On that last point, can I make a request that I don't need an answer on now, but I know that Devin's answer was 100% accurate as usual, but it seems to me that both these committees should have a link on the select board page, because using the agenda page is not easy. I do it quite a bit, and it would be very much more accessible if you go to the select board page and you'd see something about these two committees. So that's it.
Hey, Devin, you have any thoughts on that?
You can just think about it. I don't need an answer now.
Just think about it.
Well, if I can make a slight addition to that, one thing that I've wondered about, and this is something Marty loves to talk about, right, is that the select board are the police commissioners, police and fire commissioners. They're also the board that hears appeals of complaints against police officers and so on. But that role is not mentioned on the select board's webpage. Obviously, this is a very superficial change, but as part of formalizing that role, we might want to add a couple sentences about that. That's just a thought, maybe to Bernard and some others.
Yeah. Matter of fact,
that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to insist on it.
Yeah. Okay. Devin, can you do that? In our charge, there is I think it's a footnote that describes what it means to be a police commissioner.
Well, I think it's going to be part of the mission discussion by Elizabeth's committee, and I'm going to talk with her about it. It needs to be in the manual. It needs to be in the annual report. It needs to be on the webpage.
Okay, yeah.
Will that include like a duties and responsibilities type of portion as well? I mean, the police manual is, I don't know, like 600 plus pages, and I'm not sure there's anything written in terms of what the specific duties and responsibilities are, or what training our police commissioners get when they assume the position of a select board member. And I'm just curious if that's on the.
No, there's none of that stuff. So that maybe that's something we should look at.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I think just quoting the relevant state laws as well, like, you know, that the select, I mean, I think the state law probably says Board of Selectmen, but can make suitable police policies or whatever it is and hire the chief, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's very vague. I think Casey's talking about a little more detailed stuff as to, you know, responsibilities, how we, how we behave, how we, what things we can't do, what things we can do.
Well, there is stuff on that in both, and I think I've given these to Elizabeth. The explanation of the town bylaw making the title official talks about that, and also the 1987 report talks a lot about what it means. So I'm certainly endorsing that we make that stuff more transparent.
Okay. Do you hear that, Devin?
I do.
Okay. And like I said, I think a lot of that stuff, a lot of those references are in the footnote to our charge. I recall that I put them in there, so.
Yeah,
okay.
I put the link to the relevant state law that, because this is also in our charge, but this is the full text, just FYI.
Yeah, okay. Okay, anything else?
This is Devin. Just a quick reminder to our committee members. The OneDrive folder, which I mentioned and referenced previously, I'm going to reshare the overarching link for all members so that you can bookmark that. Anyone who has that link can access the documents that we share for these meetings and then add to them. So if, for example, you were reading an article just a few hours before the meeting that you thought might be relevant, you could upload it there yourself, in addition to emailing it to me as always, so I can make it part of the public packet. But that has, every folder of every meeting that we have had since the beginning of this process, in addition to different resources and materials, your subcommittee listings, all of the schedules that Bernard has put out. So I would like to just make sure that everyone is using that to its fullest capacity. And if you have questions about that, you can feel free to ask me, but I will plan to reshare that later this evening. And then my second point is that we are obviously in the throes of having a lot of subcommittee meetings, and we want to make sure that they are publicly available and all of the meeting materials are available, so that if you folks are deliberating on something and a member of the public has joined you in your Zoom room, that they can find it on the website. I usually try to post them on your subcommittee page, as well as in the direct post for your meeting. So if someone stumbles upon it on the town calendar, they can just quickly click to the hyperlink section where the meeting materials are. So I just want to, be super mindful about that, so we do have a good public experience and they can truly engage with you and the work that you're doing. And I also just wanted to give a little reminder that the OneDrive folder is a living, breathing sort of space where things are updated and put in and taken out. So if you're not getting those updates, please let me know, because your agenda and your minutes are usually in about 5 days before the meeting. I will send you a meeting reminder, obviously, but that is a good place for you to sort of be checking in on actively as documents are added and removed.
Great. Okay, anything else? Seeing nothing. Did you raise your hand, Casey? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Seeing nothing, I'll end this meeting. Thank you, everyone, and keep moving forward with those subcommittee reports and subcommittee meetings. Bye now.